Today we are going to make cocoa butter silk. And that might not mean a lot to you if you are not tempering chocolate, if you're not in the chocolate world. What is silk? Silk is essentially really well tempered cocoa butter. It is cocoa butter in the end. We just find it has such a high concentration of what we call the stage 5 crystal structure, like the best tempered culture almost. And that's kind of how I'd like to describe it. Think about making a sourdough and taking your starter and adding that in, and that's what helps make your sourdough alive, essentially. So this cocoa butter silk is basically just a very particular version of cocoa butter. And to get there, you can do it at home. It does require a few tools. As you can see here, I do have a sous vide and something to hold the water. And a couple mason jars. Outside of that, all you really need is your cocoa butter and a way to make it small enough to get it inside your mason jars. We use cocoa butter silk as a way to temper chocolate at home or even in our facility very quickly. It replaces tabling chocolate or seeding chocolate, which, if I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not the best at and I don't love. This silk method, as I'll call it, is super quick, very repeatable, and it's nice to be able to make your own at the comfort of your own home. Because this way, if you're ever low on it, you can make it. You don't have to pay an arm and a leg, although cocoa butter prices are pretty crazy to begin with anyways. But it's pretty fun. It's really nice to get hands-on and kind of see where that leads. So today, I'm going to break down all those tools that you need, how to get cocoa butter silk started, and then what to look for as we approach having a finished product. Because really in the end, it's still cocoa butter. So there are some visual cues we will look for. So let's get started. First off, we need a sous vide. For me, I have this easy vessel, it holds water. It might look like I am an Anova fanboy because I have this. I got a sweet deal on it, so I have it here. I do love toys, so this definitely satisfies that inner child in myself. Outside of this one in particular, we have a lid. We have this little grate, which really helps keep everything submerged in the water as we start going. And then we have our sous vide itself. You can get any type of sous vide you want, find one used, whatever. You just need to be able to keep your water at a very consistent temperature for the duration of this, process. I have mason jars. You can use anything that will seal it. You can even vacuum seal some pouches with cocoa butter in them. Either way, you may or not know again that chocolate and water don't really love each other. So this is kind of weird how we are using water to manipulate our cocoa butter. But if it's all sealed and all goes well, everything is pretty great. And finally, I have my cocoa butter. I have huge blocks. We get them in 20 kilo blocks here. You may find it in a smaller amount. Something to chop it with. I have my cutting board. I always have a scraping tool just in case. If your hands get dirty, you got a cloth. We're good to go. So first things first, there's really no measurement here in terms of how much you need. I'm going to fill 2 jars up with my cocoa butter, and that lasts quite a while. In another video, I will detail how to use this silk, which, as I said, is very easy. But for today, it's all about making the silk at home. So I'm going to chop my cocoa butter into small pieces and plunk them inside of my jars. The smaller pieces, the better, I find, because really you will have more surface area, and that will touch the outer walls of our jars, which will basically be as close to the water as possible, and it will melt a little faster. Nothing has to be done super crazy here. I'm gonna just be very cautious as my cocoa butter is in a pretty solid form right now, so I don't feel like chopping any fingers off today. But like I said, a rough chop does pretty well. All we want to be able to do is fit as much as we can into the jars. And if you've ever tried tempering at home, you know it can be a bit of a time drain. and very frustrating if it doesn't work out as intended. What I do like about the silk method of tempering is that it's way, way faster. And if it doesn't turn out, you can easily get it back to the point of trying again pretty quick. You haven't lost anything, essentially, unless you are, dipping your strawberries or marshmallows, and it's non-temper, it's gonna suck. But you can take that product, if it's not coated or has nuts in it or whatever, and try again. So cocoa butter is what we call a polymorph. And essentially, what that means is it can exist in different shapes while still being itself. It's still cocoa butter, but it can exist in 6 different crystal structures or 6 different shapes. Each one of those will present itself differently. Tempered chocolate has a majority of stage 5 crystal structures. Over time, it will migrate to the most stable being form 6. If you have chocolate that melts in your hand, it's likely a lower stage. And each one of them has a different melting point. So when we make cocoa butter silk, we are setting our water bath to a very specific temperature that basically defeats or takes away all the lower crystal structures and only allows stage 5 to develop. I never would have thought that there is so much to learn in the chocolate world. I got my start as a coffee guy, making coffee as a barista in the city of Toronto for years. And I really took a shine to, I guess, the process and how to make coffee, because there, again, it's a very, very particular thing. And if you happen to mess anything up, you can tell by flavor very quickly. And that's what really drew me to it, because when you get something that sits so perfectly or tastes so perfectly, it's a wonderful thing you want to celebrate. So when moving into the chocolate world, obviously that rabbit hole is as deep as the coffee world, and it's been an absolute blast to learn. Now, that being said, I don't know everything, but I do feel very confident about tempering, as we do it almost every day. So we have plenty of cocoa butter silk to be made here. I could go on and on, but when you actually start using silk to temper your chocolate, you only need 1% of silk by the weight of chocolate you use. So meaning if I have 1 kilo or 1,000 grams of chocolate, I need 10 grams of silk to make it in temper. So this here, being a couple hundred grams, will last us quite a while, especially since we only really use silk for making our bonbons or truffles out front, or like maybe the small test batches that we do in the back. So, cocoa butter already. Next up, we want to set up our sous vide. Pretty straightforward. If you've never done it before, essentially you have a bath of water and something to circulate that water with a heating coil. That's really it. On here you have your touch display, which we'll get into setting that, but to set this up, basically just want to fill it up with water. I've kind of gone ahead and thrown a little bit of water in here just to make it a little simple. We need enough water to fully submerge those 2 mason jars. If half of the jar is sitting out, we probably won't have a really strong temper of silk, so I like to fill it up. I'm going to leave a bit of room just so once I get these jars in and I can put this little grate on to sit them down, if I need to add more water, it's pretty simple. Although the other way, if it's full, you have to kind of scoop it out, it gets a bit annoying. So I normally start a little lower, then add on. And these guys will just float. I've tried other methods to get them sitting up like this, but honestly, they're gonna float around. I'm okay with that. Life will go on. This will sit in its little home. So if you're using a bucket, for example, or a pot, it works perfectly. You'll just have to find a way to submerge your cocoa butter downwards. You could easily do it with a weight of sorts, something like a weighted bag of, I don't know, marbles or whatever it may be, just to keep it underneath the surface of the water. Our sous vide rests on the side here. And I'm just going to top off our water to bring these jars up to the surface. If you find your jars are pushing, like in this case, the grate up, as you can see, you may just need a little weight to keep it all down. So I found this little thing, make my life a little easier. And now I can fill it up. So we are full. It's ready to go. All else we need to do now is throw our lid on. This helps with a bit of heat retention because we are warming it up, so it will start to evaporate. So if I can keep as much in here and keep it condensing, it's a win-win. Next, we want to plug this guy in. This one just takes pretty standard, I don't know, North American power outlet. Depending where you are, of course, plug it into something that's safe. And this will now power on. So as I mentioned, there is a very specific temperature we're looking for here, and that is 92.5 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm sorry, I don't know the calculation off the top of my head of Celsius, but I will put it in the comments when I do. So that temperature is just right at the threshold of where stages 1 to 4 of those crystal structures, they're out of play, basically. Now we can let this culture build, the culture being stage 5. And what happens over the course of about 24 hours of being in that temperature range is this cocoa butter will turn from rock solid to like a mayo-like consistency. Really, it does look like mayonnaise and it's weird, but that's what I always gauge for. So depending on the environment that this is in, your cocoa butter in here at 92.5 degrees Fahrenheit can liquefy or it can stay solid. I find the ambient temperature does play a role in making this work. If it's fully liquid, all I suggest doing is dropping your temperature down maybe by 0.5 degree. If you find it's fully solid, the inverse, bring your temperature up 0.5 degree and check on it another 12 hours. And you keep doing this until you find that point where it is super smooth and spreadable like mayo or like soft butter. When you hit that stage, then we can remove it. We can empty it out onto like a tray or a piece of parchment, let it solidify, and then we can shred it into our chocolate from there. So I am just going to switch my little settings here. So I got mine set up 92.5 Fahrenheit. All that's left now is to press start. You may be able to notice the water is starting to circulate there. With this one in particular, it will give us a temperature readout. What I've done with my water is I've just taken warm water from the tap just to speed this process up. What you can also do is warm your water to the exact temperature in your sous vide, throw in your cocoa butter silk in your containers, of course, and then you're off to the races. It'll just save a little bit of time because I find if I'm taking cold tap water and I'm trying to warm up to 92.5 degrees, with a device like this, it might take a little bit of time. We have also in the past taken our mason jars, melted them slightly in the microwave, and then plunked them in here as well. I found that sped it up as well. It depends, like if you're in a rush, it's probably the worst thing to do because something will always go wrong. Just try and embrace this process. Understand it will likely take a day to 2 days for this to work. But the more and more you do it, the faster your setup takedown will become, and you can find these little tweaks to apply as you go forward. So outside of that, we are now going to let this sit 24 hours time. We'll check back tomorrow and see if any tweaks have to be done.
So it's been about 24 hours since we started the cocoa butter silk. I took a few looks at it earlier today just to see where it was at, and it's looking pretty good. It does look like really soft butter, or as I mentioned, mayo, essentially. If you are starting this process at home and you're unsure if it's ready, or some of it still looks rather lumpy, what you can do is just pull your jar out, give it a shake, and see if it kind of clings to the walls a little bit. I use that as a bit of a gauge to see how close I am to it actually being finished. So I shook it around quite a bit. It's looking pretty soft, and I think we're pretty good. And as I mentioned previously, if you find that your cocoa butter is fully liquid, it looks like a liquid oil, like coconut oil or something, it means your water bath was too hot. So dim it down maybe half a degree, let it sit for another day and give it a shot. And the inverse. So if you're dealing with something that is rock hard, bump it up a half degree and then try again maybe in like 12, 24 hours. You will eventually find that sweet spot based on the temperature of water and your ambient temperature. It just takes a bit of trial and error. So when I'm ready to empty, I have my cloth handy, I have a spatula, and then I have something just to dump it onto. You can actually use your silk directly out of your jar when it is in that soft consistency. But for me, I like to store it so when I'm ready to use it, all I need to do is grab my microplane and shred into a bowl on a scale, weighing out as much as I need. So the delicious mayo cocoa butter. And as I mentioned, water and chocolate aren't the best of friends. So you want to make sure just to dry it off as much as you can. At this stage, if a drop of water gets on it, it's not the end of the world because likely you will have this sitting and it will evaporate, but it's just good practice not to have that happen. Jar one. What I really like about the sous vide style is it's really scalable. So if you find yourself going through quite a bit of cocoa butter in the silk format, you can easily just add a few more jars into your device and keep going. They do have devices. They have one called Easy Temper. From what I understand, it is really good. It's just a rather pricey model when you can kind of hack together something like this for around $100, $150. So if you want something you can use right out of the box, go ahead, grab one of those Easy Tempers or something similar. But for me, I love being able to play around and make things for as little as I can. So as I mentioned, here is our silk. You can see it's pretty soft, and that's what you're looking for. Little lumps in here are okay. What I do try and do is give it a bit of a stir just to mix it in nicely before emptying it. But yeah, here's another pic there. So it's weird how this is cocoa butter. Makes you want to put it on like a veggie burger or something, I don't know. So all I'm doing now is emptying my jar. I'm not hypercritical of getting it all out because I just reuse these jars. If you find you have multiple jars and one hasn't fully, I guess, turned into the right format you want, just pull out what you have and then let the other one sit for another 12 hours. It's no big deal. And we will get to tempering with this in our next video, so you can see how we use this silk at home. All right, so got my good old pile of soft cocoa butter silk. I like to level mine out a little bit. It just makes it easier to break up because it will solidify. It is tempered cocoa butter. So if I do it in a semi-thin layer, then I'm able to break it up and use that in my microplane when I need it. And I'm just gonna get in there with my finger because I don't have an offset on me. And that is it. So let your cocoa butter silk sit until you need it. The shelf life of this kind of stuff is rather infinite, so there is no real worry of it going off. And like I said, next video up, we will take this and temper chocolate at home. And that's kind of when the magic happens because it is so easy and so repeatable versus some of the other methods out there. So thanks for following along, guys.